Hello, everyone. It is Al Colleen and Stacy Harding coming to you with another edition of Fourth Level Conversations. We are so excited about our conversation today because it's about conversation to some degree. And Al and I were just spending a little time with our thoughts about what we would want to share today. And I'm really excited about this because I think it's an area that nobody stops to think about. And so today we get a chance to maybe inspire you to consider trying something on new in your dialogue and how you communicate and interact with others. So, Al, it's great to be with you again, my friend.
Yeah, you too, Stacy. It's interesting that these topics we talk about often come up at the last minute. And this one came up for me in the shower 30 minutes ago. And yet it solves a dilemma I've had for 45 years. But I think it explains so much, at least to me. And I'd like to start by suggesting that whoever is listening to this podcast is in listening to it. Here's two guys you may not know, probably don't know. And even if you did know, you may have a story about me or Stacy or whatever. But I think it says something if you listen to this podcast about you. And I think it says something about how you are one side of this continuum we're going to describe as to what is your intentionality and your practice in communication with other people in conversations. So, and it starts, and then I'd like to hear how you would like to set it up, Stacy. It starts with something I've been thinking about as we just went through Thanksgiving and we're about to go through Christmas. There's a very humorous, but I think insightful quote by Ram Dass that says, "If you think you're enlightened, go spend Thanksgiving with your family." And everybody always laughs when I say that because they all experience some truth at those times you've had the fights at Christmas under the tree or Thanksgiving, the battles, and this one won't talk to that one, and I'll never see him again, and all that jazz. And it's been a perplexion to me, really, for my whole life as to this family dynamic of why we're often least respectful, least curious about, least affirming, and least supportive of the people that are in our families. That's always been curious to me because in my life and in my client work for the last 25 years, it's very consistent that when you ask people what they really care most about, it's always their family. But it seems like a bit of a dichotomy to, well, if that's true, then why are so many of us so often we treat our families in ways we would never treat a stranger or a friend, but we take the license to often be at our worst, in a sense, with our family members. Why is that? And how does communication play into that and reveal why that is? What's your setup for our dialogue today, Stace?
Well, I think I'd love for folks to be thinking about how they communicate with those they love the most. I think that the concept of am I communicating because I want to enrich my relationship or because I want to be right and prove it? And so I'm pretty convinced that anybody that might be watching our time together, we all want rich in relationships. We all know when we've clicked with a relationship how good it makes you feel, how warm you feel. And you probably experience growth when you're in those relationships and you can feel like, man, we really communicated. Now, some people have a personality style that says, yeah, until we kind of get iron sharpen iron, we're not even communicating. And I get that. There's different personality types on how to communicate, but it might come back to a simple concept of do we communicate to enrich and learn, or do we do it to prove we're right? And unless we have good ears and cognitively think about how we are communicating and how the person may be receiving it, I don't know that we can go to the depth in relationships that I think are the most rewarding. We can have a lot of superficial relationships, and Al, maybe that's what you were talking about, why it's easier to maybe not be as courteous and communication with our loved ones is because we are in deeper relationships. But we got there because we had mutual respect and care and love for one another. And I'm not sure why we dropped that sense of respect in our communication with those we love. So expand on that.
Well, yeah, and I think it goes beyond family, even to friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. I say before anybody who may watch this that it's interesting to me, Stacy, that I have so much more respect and regard, gratitude, and inspiration from who Stacy Harding is today than I had previous to a year or two ago when we first got into a closer relationship. And I had this stereotype of who you were across the room based upon your position in this big mortgage company. You were the number 2 person in forever, and your handsome looks and your great golf game and this seemingly idealized life you had. I didn't dislike you. You were just sort of out there in a neutral zone of almost suspicion that I bet he's an arrogant prick. Because I would be if I had everything that he had, if I looked that good, if I golfed that good, if I had that kind of job, that kind of power, that kind of influence. And yet I apologize in front of anybody that's watching this that I ever even had that notion cross my mind, because what's been revealed to me about what's so enlightened and wonderful about you is your open-mindedness to learn. And not from me, I don't even teach anybody, but from our dynamic and from people out there in the world. And what I am struck by is how authentic you are, how humble you are, and how committed you are to using communication and these great gifts that God gave you to grow your sense of understanding of who you are. So I'd say in many ways, you're emblematic of one end of the spectrum of the two extremes of intentionality and communication. You are a level 4 person who is a learner that is gathering information from others, and you don't believe you already have all the answers. And in that, you are in a process of expansion, and that will, in my opinion, ultimately lead to you expanding to an understanding eventually that of your true self being your soul, beyond a belief that your soul, an experience of you being your soul, because it's the expansion of knowledge that expands our understanding of all of it, including who we are. And I think eventuating in us coming to understand that we are God. We are a part of that created all of it. And all we have to do to realize that, not that it's easy, is to let go of the isolation of believing ourselves to be a limited identity as an ego that needs to protect itself from anything that may threaten it, which includes other belief systems, which creates the other end of the continuum, which are people that have dialogue or they have communication to try to be validated as egos and to essentially have their position validated, their beliefs validated, or they're going to go to war. And I find a great degree of this happens inside families because people feel like this is a place where I don't have to pretend to care about what other people think. I can just tell them what the truth is. And yet the people that I most learn from, you included, and are inspired by are people that are exploring from a place of humility that I don't have all the answers. I may not have any answers. Let me learn more. And in doing so, I think they reveal a lot of great spiritual truths about what this dynamic is of being a human being and the ego between level 3 ego and level 4 soul. What's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Al, I've learned so much from you in the last year and a half, more in that period of time, maybe in perhaps my entire lifetime, about understanding about who we were created to be and how to have an abundant life and one free of suffering. Free of suffering is probably the wrong term. The ability to cope and see the blessing of sufferings as opposed to resisting and trying to get out of it as fast as you possibly can. And I was thinking about, as you were describing that for me, I still fail in my communication all the time. But what's different perhaps now for me, Al, is that I recognize it. I think that's the place where we start to experience some growth and some hope about what can be is when we start to realize, oh man, I did not do that in a way that blessed that person. Yeah, I got my point across, and for 1 nanosecond, I felt a little like I got it right. And then the shame of, oh my gosh, I shut that person down and I didn't let them express themselves. And so now the next time I'm in communication with them, there's already a shield up because of the experience I gave. And I want to break through those barriers in my own life of how I communicate with people because, there is a blessing of getting older like we are, Al, and that is um, we just get wiser and, it just happens. And you look back now and say, oh my gosh, so many things could have been handled differently, but it's not too late. And in fact, as I mentioned to you that how much I've learned in the last year and a half, maybe the most impactful years for both of us are the ones from now to the end of our time on this earth.
Right.
It doesn't
Right.
have to be compressed because it was a shorter time than the several years we're at this point. And I want that in life. I want to impact people in such a positive way that they in turn can turn and recognize when they fall short so they can better themselves. And then the people, and it's just the ripple effect of maybe we create a more loving, I wanted to say harmonious. I don't know if we're going to get there in my lifetime, but we can create more love in this world and love. I don't know if it creates peace, but we can create love for sure.
Yeah.
But if we can enter into our conversations, particularly in those moments when we're irritated, if something's wrong with your bank account and you're trying to get it corrected at the bank and it's taking so long, maybe that's the very moment that you express the patience and the kindness and the generosity that we all probably, when we stop and think about it, want to be to the world. It's easy to do that when you're in a relationship or situation that's going the way you want it to be. How about when it's not? Because that's when what's really in our heart comes out. And we've all got inside us anger and frustration and all those things. But if we can learn to recognize that in those times, maybe we can change our world. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're doing. If we're improving the world, we're improving ourselves.
Yeah. Well, think about, for the viewers, the listeners, think about how you notice what your style is, your pattern is in communication that you may not have ever looked at or may have never assessed. And the way I would recommend you consider going at it is think about the people in your world that it's easy for you to have conversations with and that you enjoy, and people in your world that it's not easy. And you and I were speaking before off camera about some relationships I've had for a long time that I'm not all that comfortable with because they're intrinsically combative. They're antagonistic. And as I look at it, my interpretation of it is that I have certain people in my life, in my family, that have a very aggressive, dogmatic view of reality, of truth. It may be spiritual. This is the only way to believe. If you don't, you're going to hell or whatever. It may be political. This is the only way to vote. If you don't, you're da. It could be. It shows up any number of ways. But what I find that saddens me actually is that it's very rare, if ever, I have true dialogue with those people, as opposed to the invitation for competing monologues. What's the difference? Dialogue is dialogos, two to make knowledge. It's you and I together co-creating a greater understanding than either one of us own on our own. Whereas competing monologues are, here's my truth, and it's the only truth. And so here it is. What do you think, Stacy? Are you gonna agree with it, or are you gonna fight? You want to fight? Let's, and then you do that pretty soon. And that's too often what happens, I think, back to families. It can happen in families. But I think beyond families, it happens in the dynamic of noticing how other people communicate. So start with looking at, who do you enjoy having conversations with and who don't you? Now, for those you do enjoy having conversations with, do you enjoy them because they are confirming what you think you already know, therefore confirming your bias? You go to I don't know, Pentecostal church on a Sunday morning, because you're a Pentecostal, good for you. And the other Pentecostals are all agree this is the only way to interpret Christ, Christianity, which is the only blah, 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 blah. Or do you have communication with people out of a sense of curiosity of seeing what they believe and what they understand that could expand what you believe and understand, and therefore relax your dogmas, relax the defensive barriers that your ego uses to protect what it already knows? Essentially, we're talking about is communication a practice you use to confirm who you already believe yourself to be, your ego, or as a vehicle to grow who you are still in pursuit of coming to understand who you are, your soul, your larger self. And so for people that confirm what you believe as dogmatists, you'll probably enjoy those conversations to a point, but they can get stagnant because all you're doing is reaffirming the water in the bathtub, so to speak. There's no fresh water coming in. It's just, this is true, this is true, it's just true, right? Here's more evidence why it's true. And we get a lot of that in the age of the internet, with people going to specialized areas of Instagram and Facebook, whatever, things that they look for stories that confirm what they already believe, doubling down on their belief that it's the exclusive truth of how it all is. And anybody that doesn't believe it is the enemy, right? But the other side of it is, if you use communication as an invitation to learn more, and I look at it frankly that I'm learning from God through other people, whatever God is, I'm learning what the bigger truth is, not only through what they say, but who they are in saying it, and why they're saying it, and how they approach it. And does it make me feel closer to them or more defensive against them? So what that is it gives me an idea, a little bit, of who it is I'm most easily compatible with and who I'm not. And then we can turn the picture on ourselves, the camera on ourselves, and say, but what's my real motivation in communicating with people? I've been a coach for a quarter century. Do I know anything? No, I don't know anything. And yet, because I know I don't know anything, I have access. This is going to sound outrageous. I think I have access to knowing everything, because I don't believe I'm the source of knowledge. I think I'm at best a radio receiver and transmitter of it. And if I can really own that humility, that the great blessing of our relationship, Stacy, is that we've co-created a growth of my understanding of what it's all about. And you say very kind things, but I always sort of smile when you do, because I realize it's like you're praising the radio for the quality of the transmission, is the way I look at it.
Yeah.
And I think, frankly, when I have that attitude truly, and I do, I learn as much or more from my clients who are calling me and paying me to give them coaching or opinions about perspectives. And I think it's why it's been effective for 25 years, is because I hope I don't put people in the position of ever thinking I'm a knower and that I'm a font of wisdom. Rather, I'm just somebody who is truly caring about what they believe and looking at it from an outsider's view that can come at it from different ways for them to consider how to open the doors and windows on what they believe to a larger truth as their path with divinity has them proceed. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess that's how I would set up the next stage of the dialogue. What are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, I was thinking about a number of things as you were speaking that were stimulating thoughts for me, and I was thinking about we've got a battle with the world, because the world wants to teach us to take care of ourselves, get all you can, own all you can, accumulate all you can, build your pride, pump your chest, all these things. And so it's a battle for your mind, and it's always a battle for our souls through our minds. And I was thinking about, we've just come through a political season, and you always hear these reports of favorability or unfavorability, right? I don't think as humans we ever stop and think, what is my favorability or unfavorability about myself? I'll bet it's not much better than we think it is for politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because we've been, I guess it's part of the 4 stages of life, right, Al, that we go through this period. We learn how to judge. And we start by judging others to protect ourselves.
Right.
And all of a sudden we get a little wiser and older. So then we start judging and putting shame on ourselves. And we never really release that to the part of we're part of the universe together. And we were talking earlier, you only have enemies because you view them that way.
Right.
And if we can think about how we perceive things, I was thinking also about we're in the holiday season and it's the time of year we give gifts and receive gifts. What if we could this year give the gift of patience and listening and opening dialogue with our family ones during the holidays to set, and maybe even we confess and say, when we've got together, I've always wondered, if I could just get you to understand the way I think the world is. And this Christmas or this holiday season, I want to hear how you think it is. And I'm going to do my best not to tell you you're right or wrong. I don't know.
Beautiful.
It just, to me, it seems like that might be a memorable holiday season if we were to just say, how are you doing? Tell me what you're feeling and what's going on in your mind, instead of me telling you should feel a certain way. And for guys,
That's beautiful.
for
I
guys,
love
it's
that.
a little harder, I think, because I think we tend to want to fix things and tell people how they think. And I did have a coach years ago tell me that, in relationships, you can work to prove you're right, or you can work to have a healthy relationship. And sometimes you'll get to be right, and sometimes you can think you're right, but you don't have to tell everybody else you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, what might be a way to invite a communication that's a change of pattern with people in your world, family, and otherwise, that may change the relationship and the dynamic. I was sharing with you before we started the podcast that one of the, I think, sadnesses and disappointments I have about my family is that they have such a lack of curiosity about what I'm interested in, what I do for a living, what I believe. They have zero interest or curiosity about that and always have. And this isn't my biological family, it's the family I'm married into, because they have me in a box of knowing. They already think I am this list of labels they have based on their experience filtered through their paradigm of what they think is true. And that saddens me because I realize that's then going to be just a one-way street where at best all I can do is show curiosity about their world, which I've honestly tried to do for half a century. And so they give me their story about their world without reciprocity, without any curiosity about my world. So I wonder if it might not be an interesting dynamic in, and maybe particularly family relationships, would be to, instead of the normal pattern of dialogue that you have with people in your family, what if you invited a new dialogue that said, hey, we have this tendency in the way we talk that, we talk about the news that confirms what we believe is true, and we happen to share beliefs politically or whatever it is, or we differ. But how about we, at least for just this moment, for something different, what if we addressed this question about each other? What am I curious about in your life, Stacy? And not so I can figure out whether you're a friend or enemy, but because I'm going to be open to trying to understand how you are looking at whatever you want to bring up that I may not be aware of, and how you're seeing it and what you're going to do with that. And then what are you curious about in my life in that same spirit? I wonder if that may not open a door that's been rusted shut out of the practice of mere dogmatic confirmation in relationships that you're close to because you feel like you already know me or I already know you. I don't think we do. And I think we should.
I think it's one of the real wonders of the world is the ability to be curious. And experience a number of years ago on a hunting trip, a bird hunting trip with my son, who was at the time 14. And we were with a gentleman that I respected very much, like I do you, Al, very wise. And I much of a mentor and so forth. And he felt led for some reason to spend an hour with my son and I and just talking about his growth, my son's growth, and what was coming up as he was heading into high school and beyond. And I remember the greatest message he said is, if you want to have a blessed life, the most important thing for you to be is to be curious your whole life.
Mm.
And I've never forgotten that. And you brought it back up today. And I think about that. The curiosity causes us to not think we know everything. It puts us in a frame of learning instead of assuming we've got it all figured out, because whatever any of us think we really have figured out, we're just on the tip of whatever that knowledge is anyway. Maybe we've been able to use it to produce some results in our life and get some achievement, but it could go deeper. And so I wonder if we could just create this curiosity. We were talking, before the camera also about your love for history, and you have a curiosity around that. I've had some of that as well, but as a result of that, you've formulated this ability in your life to have that knowledge to share with others. And somebody may say, well, he's just smarter. Well, it's not necessarily that you're smarter. You just dedicated your curiosity to it. And then we were given this magnificent brain to retain information and communicate it to others.
Right.
What if we could study about relationships? And maybe that's what these podcasts are all about anyway. But learn and just always be in a learning mode. And I think this, if you don't want to grow old fast, stay a learner.
Yeah.
We've all watched people. As they get older, they stop learning, and then what happens is the world starts shrinking. My dad, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes there's physical abilities. I can't read anymore. I have eyesight problems or whatever as we're getting older. But I really hope if there's a message that we could convey to everyone as you're aging, I don't care if you're 15 today or you're 75, keep learning. And because of that, it will create that curiosity for you. And then all of a sudden, people will see that in you, and you'll become curious about their lives instead of thinking that they're off track and they need to be brought back on track because of so much I know.
That's brilliant. I think it succinctly boils down today's podcast to examine whether your communication habit is revealing that you are primarily afraid or curious. Because I think it kind of comes down to that. If you're afraid, you're going to be defensive, you're going to be dogmatic, you're going to be challenging, you're going to be suspicious of any other ideas different than yours, because your ego's trying to protect itself from, you think you're protecting you, it's really your ego is protecting itself from being revealed. And I believe that your ego is the source of your suffering. I think we all have, parenthetically, existential angst over awareness of our own mortality and the eventuation of our own physical death. I think it's a universal fear. I think one of the opportunities, and maybe the opportunity of life, is to learn enough through curiosity to be able to move past that fear to understanding, even to the point that even though your body dies, you don't, is my belief system. And I think, therefore, that's arguably the highest purpose of our life, is to gain knowledge, which is only available through curiosity, which is the other side of the opposite of fear. So I hope what today's podcast does is that it invites you into noticing the people around you and their patterns of communication. And are they patterns that reveal a desire to be confirmed and validated in what they believe is already true and what they hope you think of them? Or does it reveal a curiosity to grow without being quite so caught by their ego story, out of a quest for understanding a larger sense of self than that ego that comes packaged with the fear over your own mortality, in a desperate hope that there's something after this? I think it's actually, and all this, I think, was alluded to by Jesus Christ, by Buddha, by all the holy ones, when they talk about loving your enemies and they talk about forgiveness and turn the other cheek. these are bizarre concepts to the ego, because why would I do that? It's like inviting the enemy to hurt me. I think it's because they're talking from a place of wisdom that there really are no enemies. There are only egos that, out of their egocentric desire to be validated, may attack you, may kill you, may harm you. But in a world where there weren't egos and there weren't this lesson to learn, I believe it would be a world without suffering. And I suspect that is what we will discover, what the Christian heaven is and what other different religious systems believe is this paradise of afterlife, is really an environment where our egos are not there and we finally get to see each other as the pure light that is reflected from divinity through each one of us. I'll let you close it out for us, brother.
Couple of things before we do. You talked about noticing the dialogue of others and the patterns of their communication. And I think if you think that way, here's what your inner self will do. You'll notice your own.
Right.
And that's more important than noticing others, is notice
Right.
your own. And I was thinking about you, Al, and that I don't know that a single human being could meet you and in less than 30 minutes not have a depth of respect and relationship with you, because you're a person that's not willing to be on the surface. You're not going to talk about how the weather is. And the way that you do that is that you ask compelling questions without fear that you're insulting someone's privacy. And some people may put the guard up at first. Wait a minute, I can't trust. But the second they realize that you're doing it from a place of love and compassion, oh my gosh, this is somebody maybe I could talk about how I'm feeling. I don't have to pretend with that. And that's the blessing you've been for me. And so I just hope we can do that with others. And maybe this holiday season with your family, just be a noticer, an observer, be curious. People will, if you're going deep in curiosity about that other person, let them talk. People like to talk about themselves because of the ego and so forth. But they'll also, their inner self will say, "Oh, I wonder what Al's up to. What's new? I'd love to hear more." And then all of a sudden we kind of dissipate all this tension of we got to be right and so forth. Instead, it's just we're in communion. I mean, I like that word for relationship and communication more than just the word communication. Can we be in communion with one another?
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you, Stacy. This was marvelous, and I think you're a wonderful example of a level 4 Christian, because I experience you practicing your faith in Jesus, not as a way to prove that you are chosen and others aren't, not as a way of proving you are superior in your understanding of what God is, but rather really in the spirit of how I read his words, which, full disclosure, I don't read the Bible, but I read the words of Jesus. And it's because, well, the whole story there as to why. And no offense to people that do, just my thing. But what I really love and respect about you is you're an example of someone who I think is reflecting the heart of Christ rather than the concepts that have been created in the name of Christ about how to separate yourself from others that don't believe as you do. I think if there's anybody that's likely to have people be attracted to learning more about Christ, it would be from interfacing with somebody that exhibits the principles of Christ as you seem to so easily do, which is back to the full circle of how we began the conversation. What has grown in me in my assessment of you, that you are not the stereotype I've had of you. You're much more enlightened, exalted, level 4 aware person that is a leader and a teacher for the world. So ironically, you are the things I thought of you in a worldly sense, but only at a level 4 sense. And ironically, it took being, knocked down off the pedestal of corporate executiveship and all the other things you've had, which is often the case with us. that's why we need to be patient when we go through a downfall in a worldly sense, because it's often falling onto a mountain of pillows where you finally you have a chance to escape all of that noise of trying to hold up an image that the world wants to confirm in its egoistic way. I think your greatness is more apparent today than it was when you had it easy and you had everything you had. And I think you're therefore testimony to the truth that what really matters isn't in this life how we are in physical presence or belief systems. It's who we are as souls. And I'm really happy for you and honored to know you, because you're one of those rare people that use changes in your life to open the door to why you're here in the first place. And in becoming, I mean, I would guess that if you died today, you're going to be much more comfortable with the path than you may have been had you died 5 years ago. But just a guess, just based upon the level of enlightenment I experienced from you today versus perhaps where you were then. I don't know. But
Yeah.
thank you. It's a beautiful close.
Well, thank you for that. And someone's belief about God or religion or faith or even Jesus is way above my pay grade. But here's what I do know. Anybody that would spend time studying the life of Jesus, you would see that this was an example of love and compassion and forgiveness and kindness. And that I can try to emulate no matter what my thoughts are.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
With that, we thank you. We wish you all happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We look forward to being with you in another episode soon. Al, love you, brother. Thanks so much.
Love you, man. Blessings, my friends.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, everybody. Bye-bye.